Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Richard, and thank you very much to WRSA for the opportunity to share some of our research with you. As researchers, we generate, as our job, we generate new knowledge, but we are sometimes very bad at sharing it with the public, with the industry, and certainly this is an opportunity to do so. So I was asked to talk about brucellosis. Many of you know it as contagious abortion. And compared to foot and mouth disease, the really hot and acute topic, brucellosis and also TB. These are diseases that I call the silent threat to buffalo farming. Because when they arrive, there are no bells and whistles like with acute diseases. But people only find out years down the line that they're actually sitting with a problem. Okay, so we are here to talk about buffalo, but I just also want to alert you that brucellosis doesn't only affect buffalo next to cattle, but that we had several very nasty outbreaks of brucellosis in, for example, sable antelope in South Africa as well. So we just need to keep that in mind, that it is not strictly confined to buffalo among the wildlife species. So what I thought might be useful today is to talk about brucellosis, and first in the sense, what is brucellosis? Then when should you suspect that you have brucellosis in your herd? Can you prevent it from coming in? And what happens if brucellosis arrives on your farm? So when we have a look at these buffalo, and I ask you, would you buy these buffalo? Then probably many of you would say, yes, they are in good condition, I can't see anything wrong, it might be good breeding material, and I'd agree with you. That is what you see. What you don't see is whether they are infected with either brucellosis or bovine TB. You won't know that. And the bad news is that even if they are tested, because that's the prescribed protocol, if they are tested once, then the test might fail you and produce what we call a false negative result, because these are chronic diseases. So the animals might be in an early infection phase, and then the tests cannot yet detect the infection. So in other words, it's not a fault of the vet or a fault of the lab or of anyone. It is just the disease that plays these tricks on us, and we have to find a way how we can deal with this really big problem. So what is brucellosis? It is a bacterial disease, actually of livestock. So the reservoir is domestic cattle, but some wildlife species have developed excellent ability to do exactly the same what cattle do, and that is to maintain this infection and never let go again. It's bacterial causes, of course Brucella abortus, Brucella melitensis, we will not talk about those. It's an infectious disease, like foot and mouth disease. That means the disease spreads in the herd once it has arrived. It's a chronic disease, I said that already, and that is a big difference to many of the other diseases. And buffalo can remain infected for many years or even lifelong, and they won't show any clinical signs. But what I should say as well is that both brucellosis and bovine tuberculosis are actually livestock diseases. So they are alien, or we can also call them foreign to wildlife. So wildlife react completely differently to these diseases. Not completely, but in some sense different to cattle. With foot and mouth disease, the buffalo is your natural reservoir. That's why they usually don't show clinical signs. But with these two diseases, it's different. Buffalo are not a natural reservoir. They have become infected from cattle. And that poses a set of problems on its own. So what you see as a clinical sign is usually abortion of late-term calves. So it's anything from after 6 months of pregnancy until they are about to give normal birth. We also see stillbirths, so the calf is born but it's dead. We can also see weak calves. They might survive eventually, but some of them die within the first week. Then we see reproductive failure. In other words, you have a poor calving outcome. And what you might see in some of the chronically infected animals are what we call hygromas. So these are basically swollen joints, mostly in the front legs, but also sometimes in the hind legs, and they are quite visible, as you see on the screen. Right, so how do buffalo become infected with brucellosis? When an abortion occurs due to brucellosis, then this is like a bomb exploding in terms of the release, the shedding, the distribution of the causative bacteria. You can't see them, obviously, they are far too small, but they just pop up in their millions and zillions. And there's nothing that you can do to prevent that. Once an abortion occurs, there is massive spread of this bacteria. And unfortunately, also the cow that gave birth, she has got some vaginal discharges and secretions which are normal after giving birth. And these secretions, again, can contain massive numbers of bacteria. So now we have the aborted calf and the afterbirth, which are massive sources of bacteria, but also the cow. Now, if she doesn't abort, but she gives normal birth, but she's infected, then round about the time of giving birth, that's again when she might excrete a lot of bacteria. So what do cattle do when there is an afterbirth or an aborted calf? Cattle, the same for buffalo. They are very curious animals, very inquisitive. They check out what is it that is lying there. They eat it, they lick it. You know that you hardly ever find an afterbirth, with buffalo in any case, but even with extended cattle farming, we very often don't find it. So with sniffing and licking that aborted material, that is how other buffalo become infected. But they don't show signs immediately because the sign is the abortion. So if we are dealing with a female animal, then she will harbor that infection until she is pregnant, and in late pregnancy she will abort her first calf. So contaminated bone mass, pastures and stagnant water that become infected during this time of giving birth, that is usually a source of infection that we need to be aware of and that we need to try and contain if we have an outbreak on a farm. So this latent carrier status, these are now the animals that have become infected during an abortion from another animal. These are the ones that will then, a couple of years later maybe only, abort their first calf. Thereafter they might have a stillbirth or give birth to completely normal calves, but they might still be infected. We know in cattle that about plus minus 10% of the heifer calves that are born to infected mothers actually have this latent infection. They carry it in them, and when they are sexually mature and due to calf, then they will abort their first calf. Now, do the sum, that is about 2.5 years later. So we think we have cleaned up the outbreak in a herd, and all of a sudden, 3.5 years later, we see it coming back. It's usually not a new infection. It was there if those heifer calves were not slaughtered. So that is the story, but we also, I can't do without warning you as well that brucellosis is a zoonotic disease, so it is transmitted to humans and causes disease. It doesn't cause abortions in humans, but you see these very non-specific chronic symptoms that people develop, from fever, chills, weakness, lethargy, muscle and joint pain are the most important ones. So people start complaining about severe back pain that you cannot cure, and recurrent headaches. And from cattle we usually get infected either by, again, handling of watered material, but also from, for example, unpasteurized milk and cheeses that have been prepared from unpasteurized milk. So how can you protect your herd from brucellosis? And the most important thing is, please don't pay to get the disease in. But we see in most cases that outbreaks are caused by people buying latently infected cows or bulls, or even more, forgot to mention, the heifers. So that's the biggest problem. Then when you buy, verify the brucellosis-free status of the source herd. And the once-off test that is currently prescribed cannot give you that verification. What you need is the long-standing herd history with regard to brucellosis and bovine TB. Those diseases go hand in hand and work according to the same principles. And then it's also important to know what is the brucellosis status of neighboring either buffalo herds or livestock herds, because it is transmitted across properties by various means and vectors. So your vicinity is as important as where you buy your animals from. So once brucellosis has arrived in your herd, then control or eradication is extremely difficult because we are sitting with a chronic disease and a contagious disease. So currently the same control scheme applies that is used for cattle. So immediately the farm is placed under quarantine, no movement allowed, and then there is whole herd testing every 2 to 3 months. Now, we don't have to debate whether or not that is feasible for buffalo. It is just a nightmare. And all test-positive buffalo would then have to be culled, the test repeated, and repeated as many times as it takes to have 2 consecutive negative herd tests. That means the entire herd tests negative, and after 2 months, the whole herd is tested again, and again tests negative. No more test-positive animals. Then one can start at looking to attain a disease-free status again. It's not immediate. Then that we are already looking at least a year to 2 years down the line when we get to that point. But since we have the problem of the latent carrier stage, we need to wait even additional years. So that is not a quick thing to clean up a herd, and one or other owner might actually have to decide, I rather take out my entire herd and start from scratch. That might be cheaper. So it's very important to have a physical segregation of your test positive from your test negative animals. Our current research shows that there is a little bit of hope. Maybe buffalo deal with the disease in a slightly more effective way than cattle, and maybe there is some light at the end of the tunnel if we can immediately separate positive or suspect testing animals from negative. And obviously, as I said, it's extremely important to look at safe disposal of any abortion material. But unfortunately, currently there is no option to vaccinate buffalo. Yes, we do have 2 different vaccines that are used, registered in cattle, and actually the one is compulsory for use in cattle, but we don't know whether these vaccines or any of them is actually efficacious in buffalo. And if we look at the research that is done in wildlife across the world, then for example in North America they found that the elk that also became infected with brucellosis from livestock, they tried and used the RB51 vaccine and it was completely useless. It did not induce immunity that would provide protection. So we cannot just go forward and say, well, let's vaccinate, and maybe some people are doing it, but I think they're wasting their money. So we need to do further research in South Africa on this problem, and we have to bear in mind buffalo may be related to cattle, but there are no cattle. So they deal with these diseases differently, and we need to find out whether the RB51 vaccine can actually provide protection in buffalo. If so, then it would be a really important control measure to have to optimize the diagnostic tests for brucellosis in buffalo, because they pose a number of different problems in cattle already, but now we are dealing with buffalo, and we are just assuming that they work in buffalo. But as I said, sometimes they do fail us, and we need to know more about them. All right, so that was my story. Thank you very much.